Are you ready for 2 days in hell? This Saturday, it's the 4th edition of Paris-Roubaix Femmes avec Zwift, and on Sunday, it's the 121st edition of the men's. Alison Jackson took a surprise victory last year, whilst pre-race favourite Mathieu van der Poel underlined his favourite status with his first ever win in the men's. Both riders will be on the start line again this year, but before I get on to them, I'm going to talk you through this year's routes. There aren't a huge number of changes, but I reckon it's worth going through it just to remind ourselves of what's in store this weekend. So this year, the men's race is 259.7 kilometres, making it just over 3Ks longer than it was 12 months ago, and with an extra kilometre of cobbles, 55.5 kilometres in total. They set out from Compiègne bright and early, just as they have done every year since 1977. And then on their way to the famous Roubaix Velodrome, the men will tackle 29 of the most brutal stretches of cobblestone roads in the world. The first of those sectors this year is once again at Troisville-à-Anchy, a 3-star sector that's 2.2 Ks long. In the 96 kilometres that lead up to that point, an early breakaway will try to establish itself. But that pattern hasn't happened over the last couple of years. So in 2022, Ineos lit things up in the crosswind and split the peloton in two, whilst last year the break took so long to go, they barely had any distance over the peloton by the time they reached that first section. After Troisville, things come thick and fast. Sector 28 is nothing too much to write home about, but last year there was a big crash there that took down a number of riders, including Peter Sagan. Now, that was mainly due to mud on the road after a lot of rain leading up to the race, which is likely to be the same this time around. So, positioning here is already crucial, even though there's still around 160 Ks to go. Sector 27 is the equal longest of the race, Quivy à Saint-Python, 3.7 Ks long, and the first of the cold roads given a 4-star difficulty rating. It wasn't the sector itself that caused carnage last year, but rather the crash of Josh Tarling on a right-hand bend leading into it, which took a number of riders down. Sector 26, Villy-à-Briast, is being used for the first time since 2019, and it's another long one at 3 kilometres. Not too long after that, they're going to hit a stretch of cobbles that haven't been used for quite some time. Capelle à Rennes, the sector is almost a proper climb. Now, most people think that Roubaix is a completely flat race, but there are close to 1,700 metres of climbing over the 250 kilometres. The next 4-star sector comes at Avallée-à-Walleux, 156 Ks into the race, but that's still a bit of a starter for the main course to come, because around 6 Ks later, it is the Trouet d'Arenberg, 2.3 Ks of pavés that really shouldn't be ridden on a push bike. Now, I've said this multiple times before, but when you're there and you see the state of that road and those cobbles, it beggars belief that the peloton will be hitting them at 55 kilometres per hour or more, which is exactly what they'll be doing on Sunday because positioning is so crucial there. The closer to the front you are when you hit them, the less likely you're going to run into problems or find yourself behind a split. Now, to give you a bit of a sense of just how hard that road is, here's Connor and Hank making it look very difficult.
Come on, Hank!
Oh my gosh!
Oh, wow! It's hard to ride, let alone race.
You can watch that full video over on our main GCN channel. Back to this year's route, and after the Arenberg, there is never more than 6 Ks between any 2 consecutive sectors, so not a lot of opportunity to eat, drink and relax. The other 3.7 K sector is at Ornaing-à-Waddigny, which is a 4-star rating. Apologies, my French pronunciation. That one comes after 174 Ks of racing, but it's not for another 40 kilometres and 5 sectors that they'll get onto the next 5-star one, which is Mons-en-Pévèle. By that point, the race is normally in bits, so positioning isn't quite as difficult as before, but it could be a crucial one. Firstly, because it's another long one at 3 Ks. Secondly, because it's often wet and muddy even when the weather hasn't been bad. And thirdly, because once they hit the tarmac at the other end of it, they are straight onto a bit of a climb. There are a further 7 sectors between there and the Carrefour de l'Arbre, the third and final 5-star rated pavé. Most of you will remember this sector really well from last year because it seemed to all happen over those 2.1 Ks. Firstly, Degenkolb was taken out after a coming together with Philipsen and Van der Poel. Then Van Aert attacked, only to puncture just as Van der Poel caught him. So it was the decisive sector last year, probably for all the wrong reasons. There's only 200 metres of respite between the Carrefour de l'Arbre and Gruson, although that stretch is nowhere near as brutal. And all that remains between them and the velodrome is Willem AM, and then the 300-metre Roubaix Espace Charles Croupelant section, which is man-made and a couple of hundred metres long. Just after they've completed that, they will start their lap and a half of the famous outdoor Roubaix velodrome. On to the women's then, and the main difference for them is that they take on an initial loop of around 60 kilometres from the start in Denain, generally on well-paved and fairly wide roads, and a chance for the early break to establish itself before the cobbles begin, which is at Sector 17, ornaying à Wandigny. You'll remember from the men's preview just a few moments ago that one is 3.7 k's long, so once they do start the pavé, it's with a bang. From there on, the route follows exactly the same roads as the men will take on 24 hours later. Right, just before I get on to the favourites for 2024, a reminder to keep your eyes on globalcyclingnetwork.com over the coming days, where we'll have a heap of Paris-Roubaix content for you. Written previews, interviews, news tech, and everything in between. On top of that, if you'd like to get your hands on a Hell of the North or L'Enfer du Nord t-shirt, all you've got to do is head over to shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. When you're on there, you'll also find a whole range of t-shirts and sweatshirts celebrating the biggest early season races. Right, on to the favourites for each race then, and I'll start with the men, where there is, of course, one big favourite. That man is Mathieu van der Poel, but his odds aren't quite as low as they were for Flanders last Sunday, probably due to the flatter course and the higher likelihood of luck, or bad luck, playing its part. The bad news for everybody else is that the second favourite for the win is another Alpecin-Deceuninck rider, Jasper Philipsen. His second place last year and his recent win at Milan-San Remo have proven that he is far more than just a sprinter and more than capable of competing with the best at the two monuments that suit him. He's a real card to play for Alpecin, who've also got Sylvain Dillier, second at this race in 2018. He won't, I don't think, have a free role, but he does add more strength and more experience to that team. They're going to be very hard to beat, particularly, actually, when you add in an informed Gianni Vermeersch to the mix, a rider who was 12th here last year. Now, of course, if they take Paris-Roubaix and the win there, they'll have won all three of the monuments so far this season, which hasn't happened since cycling was invented. Caveat to that, according to Killian Kelly, is 1954. That was back in the era when Belgian and French riders rode for Italian teams in Italian races and in Belgian or French teams for Belgian or French races. I'm going to stick with it never having happened before for simplicity's sake. Caden Groves, who also had a decent result at Roubaix the only time he's ever ridden it, is also likely to be in attendance for Alpecin-Deceuninck. So, who has the best chance of beating them? Well, probably Lidl Trek. Pedersen looked blooming strong at Flanders despite his crash the previous Wednesday. He's clearly got the form. He just needs to play things a little better tactically to put himself in with a chance of the win. He'll be the clear leader of the team on Sunday, but they do also have Jonathan Milan, who's been really strong all year. He's not finished this race in his two previous participations, but given his stature, you'd have thought that this is the cobbled classic that suits him the most. Dan Ola, Ed Toynes and Otto Vergara are also big, strong engines that will be very valuable throughout the day for that team. Dylan van Baarle is one of the former winners on the start line this year. He'll be joined by Matteo Jorgensen of Visma Lease Bike, who's riding the race for only the second time in his career. There's also a chance that Laporte might be back, but even if he is, you can't imagine he's anywhere close to 100% after the illness that took him out of the last few races. I'm also hoping that Olaf Koy will be racing for that team. He was good in San Remo, and he's definitely more than just a sprinter. Per Strand Hagenes and the Van Dijk brothers will probably complete their team. They are going in as underdogs this season, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Another team with cards to play will be UAE. They were 3rd, 4th and 5th in Flanders. Niels Pollitt is a former podium finisher in Roubaix, whilst Mikel Biel looks like he's flying right now. He's not confirmed to be on the start list just yet, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't. Antonio Morgado is down to ride despite his dislike of the cobblestones. Could be a long old career for him, given that he seemed to be pretty good at riding them. It also looks like Tim Wellens is starting this year. That was certainly the plan at the start of the year. And if he does, it'll be his debut at Paris-Roubaix, so it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. The other rider who has got a reasonably short odds with the bookies is John Degenkolb. As mentioned earlier, he was right up there last year until he was taken out of contention through no fault of his own, eventually finishing 7th. He's one of those guys who seems to be able to pull it out of the bag in Paris-Roubaix, even if his results this season so far have been nothing to write home about. I'm going to move on to some outsiders now who I feel have a really decent chance on Sunday. First up, Josh Tarling of Ineos Grenadiers. He'll want to forget his debut last year, where I mentioned he slipped on that right-hander and took few people down, including some of his own teammates. But this is a race that I can definitely see him winning, even if it might not be this year. He was right up there at Dwars door Vlaanderen and then top 20 on Sunday at the Ronde. But this is the race, I think, that suits his size and power profile the best. He's got a huge engine, but without the punch. But you don't really need that to be successful at Paris-Roubaix. Now, in the absence of Filippo Ganna, I reckon he should be their leader on Sunday. But it's a real shame that they won't have the experience of Luke Rowe to guide and position him. Hopefully Ben Turner's form will continue to improve for them. And Magnus Sheffield is also down on the provisional start list, but I've got a feeling that he'll skip it to concentrate on the Ardennes Classics. Laurens Rex is another one to watch. He does have a kick on him, and he was in the thick of the action this time last year, eventually finishing 9th. He is an outsider, but if everything goes to plan, he could be on the podium. Biniam Girmay and Mike Turnison are also currently down to ride alongside him at Intermarché. Fred Wright and Matti Mohoric will leave Bahrain victorious. They haven't really had the result they were looking for so far this spring, but that's not to say they can't deliver the goods on Sunday. Alberto Bettiol and Stefan Kung will lead EF and Groupama respectively. Kung was unlucky, of course, at Flanders, taken out by a crash at a bad moment, but he looks to be on solid form, as does Bettiol, who was denied a podium spot in the closing metres of the race. Lawrence Pithy has also been looking very good pretty much everywhere. He will make his debut at Roubaix after a decent showing in Flanders. One of the surprise packages at that race was the Spanish duo of Lascano and Garcia Cortina, who both animated Flanders at different points. That said, the last time Movistar got a rider in the top 10 in Roubaix was Emmanuel Aviti in 2016. Not really been a race that the Spanish squad have focused too much on in the past. Luca Mozzato will be on a high after his second place in Flanders. He'll lead Arkea B&B Hotels. He was 21st last year, which is a decent result, of course. Other riders to look out for include Oliver Naesen, top 10 at Flanders, Matteo Trentin, and the beast that is Jonas Abrahamsen of Uno X. That guy can just slog away at a really high power, seemingly forever. I wouldn't be surprised to see him try to get in the early break. If he does make it, I would say he'd go deep into the final on Sunday. Soudal Quickstep haven't had much to shout about in the Cobble Classics. On the contrary, they've had a lot to cry about. Lampard and Moscon have both come close to winning this race in the past, whilst Asgreen seemed on half-decent form, but it's hard to see them turning it around at this point in the season. Max Walscheid will be hoping to repeat the top 10 he got here last year. Alexander Kristoff can never be counted out, and Adrian Petit, well, he always seems to shine at this race. He's had 3 top 10s from 11 participations. And finally on the men's side, Jordi Meijers might fancy his chances riding for Bora Hansgrohe. On to the women's race then, and the question is, can SD Worx win it for the first time? This is only the 4th edition of the women's race, but nevertheless, it's a surprise they've not managed to win that Cobblestone Trophy just yet. Lizzie Deignan, winner in 2021, will of course be absent after breaking her arm in Flanders, but the winners of the last 2 editions will be present. Longo Borghini was the first of those 2, winning in 2022, and given her win last Sunday, she could well become the first female rider to win both races in the same season. However, as we record this, she is not certain to start, so her original plan had been to skip Roubaix after Flanders in order to fully concentrate on the Ardennes, but with her win and Deignan crashing out, there's a distinct possibility that she will be there. Elisa Balsamo and Ellen van Dijk are both very strong powerhouses that are well suited to this race. I also expect to see Lucinda Brandt in that team on Saturday. It certainly feels like they'll have the strongest team overall, and they'll be sky high on confidence, of course, given the way they've already ridden together this spring. So what about SD Worx then? Well, Vollering isn't racing. She's concentrating on the Ardennes. Reusser is out with some really nasty injuries, and so there's a lot of pressure on Kopecki's shoulders. She really should have won last year, in my opinion, but they let the gap to the break get too big. This year, however, while she's shown glimpses of her 2023 Classics form, she's been less consistent. At Flanders, she just didn't look 100% to me. This is the race, though, that she really wants to win this spring. There are other riders in their lineup who could win on their day. Femke Marcus might even have done that last year were it not for a crash in the velodrome, whilst Lorena Vives has never been better in the Classics. She's really flying. They might have been beaten in the last 2 cobbled races, but do not be fooled. They still have a big chance of winning Roubaix on Saturday. As does Marianne Vos. She's already ticked off 2 races this year that she's never won before, Omloop and Dwars, but wouldn't it be great if she won Roubaix? She's strong enough, she's definitely clever enough, and at Visma Leasebike, it will be all in for her. For me, she is the big favourite. Team DSM Firmenich post NLs, Piper Georgie is in with a very decent shout of a big result. The flatter route will probably suit her more than Flanders, and she will have Charlotte Cole for company. Canyon SRAM took fourth here with Elise Shabby a couple of years back, and I'm also hoping that Zoe Bagstedt will be there for them. Her dad Magnus, former winner of this race, will be a great person to have in the car giving direction. Grace Brown will lead Groupama and Chiara Consoni UAE. Consoni has been really consistent this spring and has been good in this race in the past. Other riders worth mentioning, Sierra, Mackay and Norsgaard, who give Movistar cars to play, and all of Phoenix de Koning, who all have cyclocross experience and therefore the skills that come with that. Puck Pizza is unfortunately not racing though. I will finish by talking about Alison Jackson, the winner 12 months ago. It was a big surprise, but she definitely deserved that win. So far this year, she hasn't shown the kind of form that would suggest she's going back-to-back, but Paris-Roubaix is such a different race. This will have been her big focus for the first part of this season, and whilst it's unlikely she'll be allowed up the road in a big group like last year, I wouldn't count her out of getting a good result nevertheless. Right, I have probably missed the eventual winners, no doubt, but I'm going to move on to predictions now. As you can see, Sai isn't here this week, but I've asked him for his picks, and he's gone for Van der Poel and Kopecky, the two world champions. I'm personally feeling the pressure because I managed to pick both winners for Flanders. So I am going to go for Marianne Vos in the women's because that's the result I want to see. And, well, I'm going to go rogue for the men's. Josh Tarling. A long shot, I know, but I believe in him after what I've seen over the last week. Let me know your picks in the comment section down below. But all that leaves me to say is a big thank you for watching right to the end of this big Paris-Roubaix preview. I'll be back on Monday with the Racing News Show to wrap up everything that happened over the weekend. I'll see you then.